Do you ever feel the pressure of having to get your life all together? I mean, we try to hide our weaknesses, and what we try to do is we try to push them so far down that nobody sees them. But I was thinking about this. When you read the Bible, it's so interesting to me that so many of the people that God chose to use were not people that had it all together. In fact, most of the people that God used were people that had a lot of flaws, made a lot of mistakes, and yet somehow God was still able to use them. I was reading this morning about Samson. You know, strong Samson. What I wanted to point out was one thing that I was reading this morning, and I want you to listen to this. This is in the book of Judges. It says, "The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. He grew, and the Lord blessed him." And now listen to this. "And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he was in Mahanadan between Zorah and Eshtaol. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him." During this time, the Philistines were a nation that were bringing oppression against the people of God. And God decided that he needed to punish the Philistines to bring some relief to the Israelites. And Samson was the chosen man. And so God began to stir something within the spirit of Samson. I want to tell you, there will be times in your life where you're going to feel a stirring that God is doing something. Even before he does what he's going to do, you're going to start feeling the stirring beforehand. And you're going to go through seasons of life where you may not explain the way you feel. You're not quite certain like what the emotions are, but you sense that God is doing something or about to do something in your life. That's the stirring of the Lord. And what I want to encourage you to do is don't run away from the stirring. Don't try to suppress the stirring. Don't try to say, well, man, I'm feeling all emotional on the inside and I feel like something's going on that I can't explain. Embrace the stirring because God is bringing some things out. He's getting you prepared for some things that he's going to do. Now, here's the thing that I want to tell you is that sometimes God is going to stir some things in you that people around you are simply not going to understand. Let me show you what happened. If you go over to chapter 14 in the book of Judges, it tells us that Samson had grown up and he was attracted to this Philistine woman. And he told his parents, I want you to go and get this woman for me. I want to marry her. And his parents were like, wait a minute, Samson, why this woman? Couldn't we find you a better woman? Couldn't we find a person that would be more suitable for you? But here's what it said. But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. And I love this part in verse number 4. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. In the stirring that God was putting inside of Samson, he was actually leading him to be attracted to a woman that was going to create problems for him, that was going to be an issue for him. And his parents were looking at the situation saying, Samson, this doesn't seem right, but I've got to tell you that sometimes God is going to stir some things on the inside of you that the people around you are simply not going to understand. It's not going to make sense sometimes to people around you, and it may not even make sense to you, but here's what I want to tell you. Pursue the stir. When you are certain that it's God that's stirring out something on the inside, it's not always going to make sense. So here's what happened. Samson ends up marrying this woman. And if you read the story, again, I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but go read it. Samson was a flawed man. He had a lot of strengths. There was a lot of things that God was able to use in his life. But I got to tell you, Samson was an impulsive man. Samson had some anger issues. Samson had some flaws that got him into some circumstances, that got him into some fights and to some battles. But here's what happened if you read the story. In the end, God used this woman that he brought into his life, and it brought some anger into Samson. And when he got angry, you know what he did? He actually went out and he began to fight the Philistines. You look at that and you think, well, man, what did he do that for? I'll tell you why. Because God chose him to bring punishment to the Philistines who were bringing trouble to the people of God. And what I was just noticing this morning, because we could go through the story of Samson and pick out all of his flaws. We could see all of these things of things to not be like Samson. But I've got to tell you, what God really stirred up in me this morning is that when God chooses you for something, he doesn't just choose you based on your strengths. Oftentimes, we try to put our best foot forward and say, God, I've got to have all these things together. I've got to get all my ducks in a row. And if I do that, then maybe God can use me. But I want to tell you, friends, that sometimes God chooses you based on your flaws. Sometimes God chooses you because you are imperfect, because you are impulsive, because you do have anger issues, because you do have control issues, because you do have all of these things going on. And we think there's no way God could use me because of all of these things. But God chose Samson because he knew that his impulsiveness would put him into certain positions that he would use to bring punishment to the Philistines. And what I wanted to leave with you this morning is that sometimes God will use your weaknesses and your flaws. God knows everything about you. He knows what you're good at, but He also knows what you're bad at. And when God chooses you for a plan, He chooses you to be the perfect person because He knows the things that you're going to get into. He knows the ways you're going to fail. He knows the circumstances and the situations that your imperfections are going to lead you to. And yet somehow you're the perfect person to accomplish His will because He put you there. When you look at yourself and God begins to stir some things up in you and you think you're just not the right person because you've been trying to hide all these things, you've been trying to make sure that nobody finds out how fill in the blank that you are, that you can't hide it from God, that God's aware of it. But not only is God aware of it, that God can actually use it. So I want to encourage all of us, stop trying to be so perfect. You're not perfect and you never will be. But that doesn't eliminate you. A lot of times, God will use your greatest failures to become your biggest ministry. He will allow you, in the ways that He's taught you, that you've failed and you've messed up, and then He comes and redeems that area of your life. He'll use you to minister to people who are going through the same thing. So I just want to encourage you today, when God begins to stir you up, and there's people that are around you that don't understand it, and they're even saying, you shouldn't do this. If you know it's the Lord, pursue it. But there's going to be some times where God stirs some things in your life that you even say, God, I'm not the right person for this. I can't do this. And God says, oh, yes, you can. In fact, I'm going to use your great weaknesses and I'm going to use it for my plan. And God actually is picking you because you are the right person for the plan in spite of your flaws, your weaknesses, and your failures. So lean in. Say, God, I may not be much and I don't know how you're going to use this, but I know you're stirring this in my spirit. So here I am, Lord. Use me. And it's amazing what God will do through you if you'll just embrace what He wants to do. Friends, you are the right person. God may be stirring some of your hearts to do some things that you never thought you could do. But stop running away from your weaknesses. God's aware of them. You don't have to hide them. Just be who you are and let God use you to do amazing things. And I'm believing that even today, in this next season of your life, you're going to see God use some things that you never thought He could use. And it's going to bring great joy and freedom to you when you get the freedom to know, I don't have to hide from this weakness anymore. God's actually able to use it. So hey, I'm going to see if God can use my weaknesses. Why don't you do the same? Subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm going to keep coming to you with devotional thoughts, hopefully helping you along your faith journey. And I love you so much. God bless you.